Cool. So we are back for episode 4 of our Crypto Innovator Series and are super excited to have Laura Shin here with us. Laura, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are super excited to dive into your background, what you're up to at the moment with crypto and your podcast and your reporting, and then obviously your new book. I imagine there's not too many people in crypto that don't know who you are or what you're doing, but for those who may not, if you want to give us kind of a quick background of yourself and how you originally got into crypto, we can kick off there.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I've been a journalist for like 20 some years, and I was last covering personal finance as my area of coverage. And it's not a beat that like changes a lot. And so after I'd kind of learned everything, I was getting a little antsy and wanted something new. And my editors at Forbes said, oh, hey, we have this idea to do a Forbes FinTech 50 list. Do you want to head it up with another reporter? So she and I decided what we would do is just like divide the list between us. And so I took the category of digital currencies and then basically became like completely obsessed. I'm sure most crypto people, have had that experience of falling down the rabbit hole. But kind of from that point forward, I like really didn't want to cover anything else but crypto. I was like just begging them, like, and back then it was like Bitcoin and blockchain were kind of the two things. And so I just kept saying like, I just want to cover Bitcoin or blockchain and nothing else. But I was quite a popular writer for the personal finance area. And, generally was like generating a lot of page views, which brings in advertising money. So they weren't like super eager to have me do that. But then the good thing is that as we all saw in 2017, crypto became popular enough that then I could say, oh, okay, so can I just only cover this and nothing else? And they said yes. And so at that point, I became a senior editor at Forbes. And then actually I should backtrack because the year before in 2016, I had started my podcast Unchained. And at that time I was only doing it every other week. But pretty quickly I realized, oh, wow, the podcast is having a really profound impact on people because I remember, so I started it in June 2016. And in the spring of 2017, like maybe March or something, when I was at a crypto conference, or it might have even been the winter, like February, I realized a lot of people were talking to me about my podcast, but not my articles. And I, I'd written a lot of articles too. So and like I said, I was only doing the podcast every other week, whereas obviously I was writing multiple articles a week. And so I just realized like, oh, wow, this is, people remember me for that. And I kind of realized, oh, it's the power of the voice, I think, because I also listen to podcasts and you sort of feel like you get to know the people in a way from listening to them. So what happened was when I was full-time at Forbes, then at the time of kind of the real bubble, late 2017, early 2018, someone who was kind of helping me out with the podcast said, oh, I'm realizing, like she worked in marketing in the space already. And so she had been doing research into what the different podcasts were charging for sponsorships and stuff. And she said, Laura, you could make this amount of money. And it was more than I was making my full-time job. So then I realized, oh, that would be great because I had always wanted to write a book. So I quit Forbes, and because the podcast didn't take my full time, that meant that I had a few days a week to devote to my book. So then I worked on the proposal, sold it, and now I've been working on the book for, it depends on how you count, like if you count on when I started the proposal or when I actually got the contract, but either way, it's like 3 or 4 years, depending on how you count. So it's been a long time. It's going to come out in a few months. I'm super excited. I can't wait for you guys to read it. And this is my opportunity to hold this up. I guess it's like, you can't read it, so I'll just read it to you. The Cryptopians, Idealism, Greed, Lies, and the Making of the First Big Cryptocurrency Craze. And it dives into that period that we talked about, which was the ICO craze. And because Ethereum was the launch pad for that, a big portion of the book is kind of an early history of Ethereum. Although when it gets into the ICO portion, then it kind of branches out to some other things that were going on in the space. So that's kind of the I guess short version. maybe not so short.
No, I mean, it was great. Definitely a lot of stuff to unpack there. And I think gives people, the Spark Notes equivalent of what you've been up to. I guess to unpack some of the origins, I know, you had gone to Stanford in Columbia, and was that always in your career path to become a journalist? Or is that something that, once you got to school, you saw that as more of a direction that you wanted to head?
It's funny. I'm not quite sure. I knew that I always wanted to be a writer, and that was like the word. But the thing is that even as far as like junior high, I was always involved in the school newspaper. And so it just became quite natural. So right after college, I did have one non-journalism job, which was I taught ESL at an international school in Indonesia. But then afterward, I moved to New York, and immediately I got a job at newsweek.com. And I will say, and I feel like I'm already seeing this in the crypto space, was something that was really good. So at that time, nobody knew how big the internet was going to be, or at least I didn't.
Yeah.
And so to my mind, it wasn't good that I was at the website. I wanted to be at the magazine.
Yeah.
And, looking back, I realized, oh, actually, it was great that I was at the website because, so I don't remember the number of people on the website staff, but it was maybe in the ballpark of like between 8 and 12, I think, if I remember correctly. And so that meant that I got to do so many roles, just like all different kinds of tasks. And so then I kind of like learned a lot, and I feel like I learned more than some of the people kind of in similar entry level positions at the magazine. So in a way that was actually quite good. And I still got to write a few little, like this little pieces for the magazine here and there. So yeah, so it was a lot of exposure to all different kinds of aspects of journalism. And then actually the other piece of it that was good was that on the website, then I got to write more frequently and longer than I would have if I'd been at the magazine. So overall, looking back, I realized actually it was a really good thing.
Nice. It's always interesting to see how those things that we wish for or things that we wanted to happen that didn't happen end up kind of being a blessing in disguise. I've had one when I was working in New York in traditional finance where it was climbing up the corporate ladder and trying to get another promotion when I was at Morgan Stanley, and got passed up for that promotion right around 2015, 2016, and had a few friends that were starting a crypto hedge fund and decided that it was a good time to make that leap, and things have worked out. So it's weird to see, some of the goals that we had or aspirations that we had that didn't work out ended up being blessing in disguise.
Yes.
And then as far as like crypto itself, was that something, the introduction for yourself into crypto, was that through Newsweek, or did that start when you got into, I know you did some columns for Wall Street Journal, New York Times and things like that. Was that at that
Yeah,
point?
no, I mean, the Newsweek thing, like that was in the late 90s. So
Okay.
it was definitely well before Bitcoin existed.
Okay.
No, the Forbes thing happened in like, I think if I can't, I'm pretty sure if I look at my calendar, I think it was May 2015 when I kind of like started doing that Forbes FinTech 50 list and like completely got obsessed with Bitcoin at that point. And like, that at that time, I think what the appeal was, as I mentioned, the personal finance beat, it doesn't change a lot. But with Bitcoin, it was like, there was, I mean, even then it still felt like there was a lot happening, even though it's nowhere near the level of pace that we're seeing now. But there was just kind of the sense that like you could kind of constantly learn something new, and that the substance of the material itself was evolving, which I also really liked. And yeah, just I really I don't like it if I have to do things that are kind of like too easy for me. It's like I just can't bother. But if it's like a challenge, like I really enjoy that, and it's super fun. And like obviously covering this technology is not easy. And so
Yeah.
that's like one thing I kind of really love about it.
When you were getting started, in your own journey down the rabbit hole, what were some of the resources back then? No, it's always interesting for me to look back and see when I have friends or family members or colleagues that were asking, how do I get started in crypto? Where do I start? The progression of different entry points has changed from 16 to 18, from 18 to 20, from 20 to 21 of you should start here, here, and here. And obviously with your podcast and other podcasts and books and things like that, the level of content, the quantity of content is just so abundant now that there's so many more resources now than there were back in 2013, 14, 15, 16. When you were first getting started in researching crypto, was it mainly on books? Was it on podcasts? Was it on forums? Was it on social? A mix of all the above?
So there's a couple things. So first of all, and this is probably why, like one of the many reasons why I love being a journalist, but basically, when you are a journalist, you can call people who are at the center of the action and be like, I'm a journalist, I'm doing a story. Can you explain this to me? And they will do it. And so I was able to learn from some of the most knowledgeable people at the center of the action, which was such a great blessing, you know, and they really took the time to explain things to me. Like, in fact, I would say that the interview that actually really made me fall down the rabbit hole was this interview that I did with Devin Gundry, who was, I think his title was like COO of Chain, which people might recall was a blockchain technology firm that did deals with like Visa and NASDAQ and stuff like that. And he is the person who explained Bitcoin and blockchain technology to me, and he did it in such a good way that I really understood the significance of the technology. And yeah, and then at that point it was just like I could not get enough. But I do remember that there was this kind of like a sort of writer's retreat that I took just by myself. Like it was like a working vacation. And I actually took it to work on this other book idea that I had, which I would still like to write someday. But anyway, it's obviously on hold for now. But I, instead of working on that book, I was so obsessed with Bitcoin that I kept just trying to learn more about it. And so I remember one of the funny things I did that week was there was some, I would have to look this up. There was some course on, it was a certification course that I think Digital Currency Group had put out. And it was like some kind of council that I don't remember what the details were, but I remember, and no offense to Digital Currency Group, because they obviously have done amazingly, you know, well over the years, and their portfolio companies have been doing well and everything. But I remember thinking like there was something a little lacking in the course.
Yeah.
You know, just because it was so early, and even though I hadn't learned that much by that point, I think maybe I'd been covering Bitcoin and blockchain for like 4 or 5 months at that point. But even then I could feel that it was like kind of outdated. You know, I don't know when the course had been made, but there weren't a ton of options, you know? So yeah, like that's why my sources back then and to this day continue to be my best resource.
Absolutely. Are there, I know you mentioned one specifically, are there any others that come to mind during those first few months or first few years of doing interviews that were kind of instrumental in learning more about, obviously, you know, you have Bitcoin, but then in 2015, 2016, you had, you know, Mastercoin and kind of the rise of ICOs and, you know, the blockchain, not Bitcoin topics. Was there any other conversations in that realm with, you know, anyone else that kind of still stand out to you as tipping points to keep you, you know, keep your head down and keep going into crypto?
Not really. Like there isn't any one particular resource or person, but what I will say, and this is something that is like funny and I wouldn't say embarrassing is the word, but it says something about the time that, you know, I was learning all of this in. My first big story on this technology was about how blockchain technology would be used by Wall Street, like in traditional financial services. And it was all about chain and everything like that. They were the focus of the story, which was a big magazine, what we call feature well stories. So there was like a line on the cover about the story. And, you know, when you open it to the middle of the magazine, it was like a big feature with, you know, huge, beautiful photos of the founders of chain and stuff like that. So in a way, that whole first year, or not, it's the whole first year, but I guess like the first, you know, 6 months or so, maybe even 9 months, like I really thought that Bitcoin kind of it's weird, like, because looking back, I realized I was personally obsessed with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And yet the stories I was writing and like what my sources were telling me was that actually like Bitcoin and the assets, that's not the important thing. The technology is the important thing. So it's just fascinating that those were kind of the stories that I was focusing on. And like I said, I mean, it's what my sources were telling me. But I
Yeah.
do remember that for the Forbes FinTech 50 list itself, because I had this narrative in mind, I didn't put Coinbase on the first Forbes FinTech 50 list, which is hilarious
Yeah.
because when I interviewed them, they were like, no, we're not switching to blockchain. We like don't think that's a thing. And
Funny.
and I was like, oh, Coinbase doesn't get it. And
Yeah.
so it's super funny because obviously I was super wrong and they were completely right.
Yeah, I think it's funny to see the transition, going back to how do people get started and where do they start. It's interesting to see now that for a lot of people, Bitcoin still seems to be kind of that initial entry point of, what is crypto? And they kind of start with Bitcoin and then they get introduced to Ethereum and then they get introduced to all the financialization of assets that are happening on Ethereum, whether it's DeFi or NFTs or social tokens or community tokens or back then we had ICOs and STOs and IDOs and all these like acronyms of innovation that was happening on Ethereum. And, with Bitcoin, it's, obviously we have Lightning Network and some other really interesting stuff. And the asset, I think is one of the best long-term investments that anyone can really make at this point. But it's interesting to see that people still kind of gravitate still towards Bitcoin to start and then get exposed to other aspects. I think we're now just starting to see where people that is getting dipped on its head a little bit, especially with a lot of the intersection of crypto culture and community that we're having now, and
Yes.
people that are starting to get into Ethereum first, and then looking at Bitcoin or looking at Solana or AVAX or other assets. But it's interesting to see that mind share has shifted from entry point Bitcoin to entry point Ethereum, and how that market dynamic has changed over time.
Yeah, or I wouldn't even say that the entry point is Ethereum so much as just like NFTs generally. Like I'm noticing this with kind of random interactions I have with strangers who find out what I do. And then they'll talk to me about NFTs, but they won't say things like Bitcoin or Ethereum. They're just talking generally about NFTs. And they'll talk about the environmental impact or whatever, but they don't seem to really get into the technicals around like the chains or anything like that. So yeah, this reminds me of an episode I did last year with Jake Bruckman, who at that time, and I think it was literally actually a year ago, roughly, and he said, "Oh, NFTs are bringing normies in," and I think we've seen that play out like now with these deals that like Dapper Labs is doing with NBA, with the NBA and the NFL and La Liga, and just all the different big cultural creators who have been getting into this, like Grimes and Kings of Leon and Ashton Kutcher. And, I mean, that's kind of, there's all sorts of people that now are gravitating and, they're not in it really for the money. They're in it for the NFTs, or I mean, they're in it for the being able to create and then make money for themselves, but they're not in it for the financial aspects, the way that people who were into Bitcoin were, and perhaps people who were into Ethereum, but people who are into Ethereum, they're more like technologists, like they want to make these decentralized applications.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that's like the interesting part with NFTs is that, of course, a lot of people that get into them would like to have some type of financial upside, but a lot of it's like, what does that NFT unlock? And is that like a signaling? Is that a Discord channel? Is that real world merchandise? Is that ticketing? Is that, it's what that unlocks and the digital status of that can provide. Sometimes it outweighs, the asset that you bought at 2 ETH being 4 ETH or things like that. And obviously, we see crypto punk floor prices that are, exceeding hundreds of ETH and going into the, tens of millions of dollars, and then Bored Ape Yacht Club and these collections that are starting to take off financially. But I think a lot of the people that I know that have made the most money are the ones that have not been focused on making the most money in NFTs. It's the ones that truly want to help out the creators and help out the artists and give them a platform to showcase their work. And then the culture and the community that forms around these assets that tend to be, the best social investment that you can make. And it's, NFTs are essentially like, are the Gen Z version of like a country club, but just online in the metaverse. And access to that club is something that people really want.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about the NFT space that feels to me like it's all about inside jokes in a way, because they get in their little discords and then they have their own little lingo. And like sometimes I'm on crypto
Yeah.
Twitter and I'm like, I cannot understand what is going on in these tweets.
I wake up every morning, it's just GM, 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 GM all day.
Right, right. I mean that one you can figure out after a while, but
Yeah, some of the lingo and some of the language we it's interesting to see that evolve as well, because I think the acronyms that we've used in crypto have largely been a focus of crypto. You had ICOs, and then you had STOs, and then IDOs, and then NFTs and DeFi, and it's like
yeah, or things like FUD or
yeah,
HODL or
yeah,
like there's kind of our own way of speaking.
yeah. We have our own our own dictionary of terms. But no, it's I think it's so cool that crypto has been able to stay along and continue to take not only that financial share, but that mind share and human capital that continues to pour in. And obviously, I think you've done a really great job of showcasing a lot of that human capital, the ideas, the inventions, these services, products that people are creating. To take a step back and kind of dive back into like 2016 era, when you were starting the podcast, what was like the main reason? I know you were looking at other content in the space and saw that there's an opportunity to showcase some of that, but was the idea to highlight specific founders or entrepreneurs or funds, or was it just there's not really a great resource for crypto right now and I want to create one?
Honestly, it was really just that I personally loved podcasts and I just wanted to make a crypto podcast. That was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And so I just had an idea that, yeah, I could just interview interesting people in the space and just feature them. And I remember that I actually happened to be at Necker Island when I launched it. And I went there kind of knowing obviously there's going to be interesting people here, but I didn't know who I was going to interview.
Yeah.
And I kind of was just like listening around during the panels and the lunches and dinners, like who are kind of the interesting people that are, saying things that like the wider community might be interested in. And so I just kind of picked some and they became my initial guests. And actually one of them, Elizabeth Rosiello, of BitPesa, which has a new name and I'm just blanking on it right now. But I remember that, when I can't remember when this happened, but I think for a survey one year or something, somebody wrote in, you have to have Elizabeth Rosiello back. And I do, because it's been too long. And even the episode that I released a few days ago, which is about how this one Afghan entrepreneur is using crypto. Like I'm seeing a lot of people seem to really like that episode, these kind of like, use cases that are outside of the US. Cause it is true. A lot of my show tends to focus around the US because, that's where we are. And, that's kind of like most of the sources I know and stuff like that. But yeah, I think people would want to hear, what's going on with her company again. But she was just such a great talker. And I remember at the retreat thinking, oh, I have to have her on my show. So yeah, when I launched it, I really didn't know who I was going to interview or anything, but I was just like, I'm about to meet a bunch of great people. I'll pick some and put them on my show.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think just starting is like the biggest thing. It's interesting to see a lot of the mind share outside of just the US right now, and specifically around either payments or gaming. You're seeing obviously a lot of traction around like YGG or Axie or gaming crypto and how that's impacting other countries and other other people that are using crypto for either income or ways to take care of their families and things like that. So I think it's cool to see that the innovation, whether it's being pushed there through, some of the regulations that are, either going to take place or proposing to take place, or just through, normal market movements. It's cool to see that a lot of these companies, whether it's like a Axie or CoinGecko or companies like that are not their founders aren't in the US, the companies are in the US, and yet they still have such a big impact on the community. Some of my favorite podcasts are the ones where you get to start off with like a host and their guests like from day one, and then see how that host evolves, day after day, and how those guests come to be. Out of the amount of episodes that you've done now, which is insanely impressive, are there any, if you had to think of like 3 or 5 or 10 lessons that you learned across those episodes, whether it's around crypto or just in general, are there any that come to mind that you think are like worth highlighting?
Well, one that I talked about I think this might have been like an AMA that I did. But or the industry is making things from scratch. It hasn't been built before. And so I think people can get creative. And Chris Bernisky read an essay that he wrote on my show, and in it he talked about the importance of infusing the technology that you all are building with the values that you want. And I think for people who are entrepreneurs in this space, that's something really great that you can say, hey, these are my values and I'm going to build according to those values, or that, yeah, you can be creative and have fun. And it's just kind of like an open space. Like, I really would advise people to have fun. I think, and obviously I hear this from you guys all the time, I know that regulation, particularly in the US, can be difficult, but have you ever heard that expression that like you can be most creative when you're just working with like the leftovers in the kitchen? Or I don't know if it's a saying, but I've just heard people talk about that's when you get your most creative, when you have these constraints. So I recognize people's frustration with that, but I still think that even within that, I'm sure there's probably interesting things that people can do. Hopefully, we'll see. Like this today, the day we're recording is September 29th. And some of the lawyers in the space have been saying that traditionally the last days of September are the days when we see enforcement actions or settlements with the SEC and CFTC.
Yeah.
And already we've seen some small announcements around that. And
cracking like Monday, Tuesday?
it might have been yesterday. I don't remember, but that's one, it was pretty minor, the fine, like $1.25 million. But who knows tomorrow what's going to happen. But the point is that, like even with all that, we'll see, but hopefully people are already having fun. I would imagine so. Given what I know about the space, I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think the amount of fun in crypto is at almost an all-time high, which is interesting to say. I think there's just so much innovation, and that's something that we have to always try to keep up with, through our products is trying to build around the innovations happening in crypto and ensure that people can, easily comply with existing tax regulation for DeFi or NFTs or for DAOs or whatever, tends to come next. So innovation can be really fun, but also can be really daunting. It's, I feel it myself sometimes. And, I have a lot of friends that are not full-time crypto and they're like, how do I keep up? And I'm like, I run a fund and a company in crypto and I can't keep up. Like, I'm working 20 hours a day and I'm still behind. So the pace of innovation is so exciting to see. And I tend to agree. I think the most creative companies, projects, services tend to come from, kind of confined constraints and with your back against the wall. And I think, a lot of the FUD that we've seen, we've been able to largely pass. We had this huge FUD around, Bitcoin mining in China and in Asia. And if that, continued to centralize, what that would do to Bitcoin in general. And we saw, through some of, those actions, a lot of that hash rate became distributed across the world, and specifically in the US, which is typically evened out. And you're seeing like the difficulty continue to drop and the hash rate continue to be, exposed around the world. But I think within the US, looking at either tax regulation or some of the other regulation that we've seen with like DeFi or NFT protocols, some of the FUD that we've seen at least are, if crypto is so decentralized, they shouldn't be able to attack these things. I think that's a thing that is going to be kind of like a battling cry moving forward, is continuing to focus on that decentralization and the ability to have that. And I think, there's been a few companies like a Compound that have gone like, very centralized, or Uniswap centralized into decentralized, and the rise of like the DAOs in crypto are going to be kind of that next wave. Still some legalities to work through and stuff like that. But it's interesting. Long story short, I tend to agree that, when there's some constraints confined, the best entrepreneurs and the best ideas still find a way through. As far as the podcast in general, what I know, what was the reason for starting your second podcast? Was that just to have a little bit different dynamic on crypto itself and focus on a specific part of crypto or a specific category, or was it just there's too much to do under one, on one roof, and let's diversify into two separate ones?
Yeah, well, I think of the longer show as like feature stories, and they're evergreen. They're not necessarily, I mean, not all of them are, because sometimes I do topical shows, but generally they're ones where if you listen a month later or whatever, it's not like it's kind of older news.
Yeah.
So with the shorter show, that is pretty much always about news. Not always, but pretty much. And that just enables me to kind of have some commentary on things that happened that week. Like for instance, for Unchained, I often book it, a couple weeks in advance, sometimes just a week in advance. But for Unconfirmed, I normally book that like 2 or 3 days in advance, because I kind of want to see on Monday and Tuesday what's the news.
Yeah.
And then I sometimes it's quite obvious and I can just send an easy invitation on Monday. But other times, I'm like, oh, there's like 3 stories that are kind of interesting. Like, which one's going to be the one people are going to care about on Friday? And so then I kind of like debate a little bit, or I even might post a poll on Twitter or whatever. And then, so that's really it. It's just a different type of show. But I'm a little bit too busy right now at the moment, but my intention is to just bring it all under the brand Unchained, actually, probably in like, I don't know, the next, depending on my schedule, sometime in the next like 2 months. So we'll see.
And still with the same format though, still having like kind of like the shorter episodes.
The long show on Tuesday and then the shorter show on Friday to cover the news.
Nice. It kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if you are a fan or listen to Invest Like the Best with Patrick O'Shaughnessy.
Yeah.
But the ability to branch out from just like Invest Like the Best into other aspects of discussions that are happening and have like different types of variety into the consistentness that he has with Invest Like the Best. He has one that's like more focused on entrepreneurs and like the background and their story, and then it gets into more of like pure investing and things like that. So it's cool to see when a podcast host can bring in a little bit of variety, because I think different audiences want either shorter content or they want longer content, or sometimes they want both, and the ability to choose between either short form or long term, whether it's in writing or verbal, is a nice feature to have. Well, sweet. I know we've touched on kind of your background, how you got into crypto, what kept you in crypto, how the podcast started. I know one thing that I'm really excited about. You mentioned Chris Berdinsky. I have crypto assets on my bookshelf behind me, and probably 25 to 30 other crypto books. So super excited to add yours to the library. I know you mentioned that it wasn't just a few months ago thinking of getting that off the ground. It's been, a few years in the making. When did that initially start to occur to you that could be important? I think some of the ones that I typically recommend to my friends or our customers, things like that, will be, Nathaniel Popper's Digital Gold, or now Cami Russo has her book that is what I like to call kind of the Ethereum version of Digital Gold, and more focused on the origins and backgrounds of Ethereum. We're seeing, obviously more funding go into documentary films, feature-length films, and things like that around origins, what's happening now, what's happening in the future. Long story short, when you were thinking of creating the book, what was kind of the the ideas behind wanting to write a book first, and then, how did the story start to tie together and become into a format?
Well, so I pretty much always wanted to write a book ever since I was a little girl. So after the year 2017, I realized, wow, what just happened here? This is kind of an historical moment. And I felt that it would be good to kind of unpack all the craziness because, I mean, for all of us who lived through that, it was quite the wild ride. And I thought that a book describing how that craze happened would be really interesting. The funny thing to me is that when I started, I did not really, really, really know what had happened at that time. And now I do. And it's really different from what I thought the book was going to be like. So that's very interesting to me. Just that I started on this journey. I thought I was going one place, and I mean, I went to that place. It's just that the journey to that place turned out to be different from what I thought. So there's a lot in the book that I think will be news to people because it was news to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really excited for people to. Okay, you guys, by the way, so one thing I'll let you know is that I personally, so I'm assuming that everybody who's watching this live stream are kind of crypto nerds, basically. And so you guys will appreciate my footnotes where I have links to all these blockchain transactions. It's super cool. So you can see the action, I mean, obviously a lot of transactions are on Ethereum, but there are a bunch also on Bitcoin and even like other random chains here and there. And so I was able to put all that. And then obviously there was also a lot of action on Reddit and like a lot of blog posts and all things like that. And so I was able to get links even for things that had been deleted or whatever, like often using the Wayback Machine, you can actually see what it was at the time. And so I just have these really great links because, the action was often on the internet. So yeah, you can like follow along. And for that aspect, I'm quite excited for the crypto community. I think, the everyday person who reads this are gonna be like, what's this?
Yeah.
But I think for true crypto nerds, I personally, if I were you, what I would do is I would buy the physical book just because like since this is a decentralized world, I had to put a list of characters in the front because there's just like too many people to keep track of. And I was a little bit like, oh, these poor readers, like, it's not like, I don't know if you ever read something like Hatching Twitter, but, it kind of tracks the 4 co-founders. And even that book, like sometimes I'd be like, wait, which one is this? And which one, and so then for these decentralized worlds where there's just so many different people, I was like, I have to give them a list of characters. So in that regard, I feel like the physical book is good because then you can kind of flick back and forth. And then I also have a glossary in the back. So like if you recommend it to friends who, are not really into crypto and don't know what a 51% attack is, or don't know what, like a hard fork is, or don't know what an ERC20 token is or whatever, like they can flip back and forth also with the glossary. And then I even have like a little timeline that just, because there's so much action, it's just sometimes easy to look at the timeline. But if you want to click through on the links and then see all the action on the internet, then I would recommend you get an ebook. So you can kind of have both reading experiences. Like I would do the physical. And then if there was something that you actually wanted to like see the original source for, you could click on your ebook and then look at that link. So that's what I would do personally. And I'm not saying that because I want people to buy 2 copies of my book.
No,
but I really do think this would be the best experience.
I think that's amazing. I think that's like the interesting part to look at is all the on-chain activity that occurred at that time and kind of map that to any, in real life, or whether it's Discord or Telegram or Twitter or Reddit or whatever, and kind of map those actions. So I think, we had the guys from Fourth Revolution Capital on our last episode, and we walked through like tooling and things like that. And, things like Nansen or platforms like that, where you can kind of track on-chain activity and see where the quote unquote smart money's moving, where are they moving into? And that needs to be a way better description of what things are actually happening than looking at just a Twitter feed or looking at just a blog post or just, a newsletter. It's like where that money's flowing and between the addresses and who's participating and who's not, and linking who owns the address and who's not it's a really fascinating thing. And especially, back when, when I was at Blockchain Capital in 2015, we worked heavily with Mastercoin and kind of on like the first ICOs, and then Ethereum's ICO started happening. So like that was kind of my first entry into like on-chain activity and what does that mean? And being even now, as you mentioned, you can look back and see all the addresses that interacted with the first Ethereum, payout and who sent what Bitcoin in and who received what, and then actually look through each wallet address to see where that went. And it's fascinating, but as you mentioned, definitely pretty crypto nerdish. So good to have the digital copy. And then I'm personally a really big physical book lover. I love to write and highlight things and make notes and edits and look back and things and things like that. So you'll definitely have a buyer of both sides. And for myself, I'm super excited to get my hands on a copy.
Cool. Yeah, I would be interested to hear what you think after you read it.
I'm pumped. I'll have to, maybe we'll order some for like the whole company and give them out to, our employees and give them, because that's always, especially now with, we just raised our Series A few months ago. So it's like we're in, pretty big growth phase. So we have, really great people that are coming in to work with customer service or marketing or biz dev or whatever. And one of the challenges always is, how do we onboard them into crypto? And I think, as we talked about earlier on the episode, there's been a shift in, you should start here. And now it's like, there's so many really great books and really great podcasts and really great newsletters and really great Discord or Telegram channels and things like that. And, I think would be a great addition to some of our onboarding materials to have them start there. And, I think if you start with like your book and Cammy's and, Nathaniel Popper's and things like that, it gives a really good origin story that gives you some context for how things got to be where they are. Because I think if you just dive in and try to, scratch the surface of where crypto is, it's helpful to understand, where it started and how it's gotten to this point.
Yeah. And I will say that I had some of my real life friends read drafts of the book because I wanted to make sure that this was accessible to people who don't know anything about crypto. And my best friend, who is an artist and yoga teacher and actor, she actually came to understand the technology so well that actually she didn't realize she was doing it, but she caught a mistake. Basically, there was one part where they had decided to do something one way, and then they later changed their minds, but I had forgotten to say that they changed their minds. And so then when I described it the second time, she was like, wait, I thought they were going to da-da-da. And then I was like, oh, right. So there was that. And then hilariously, there was one part where she was like, Laura, I don't understand what you wrote here. The reason was because I myself didn't understand it. The way the source had explained it to me, I was like, okay. And I kind of just tried to write it the way that they had said it. But yeah, because I didn't understand it, she didn't understand it. Yeah. So then I went back and made sure I understood. And yes, now it's fully understandable. But what I'm trying to say here is she is someone who had zero background, even, kind of like isn't a huge fan of financial things at all. And she now really understands a lot about blockchain stuff. So
it sounds like a great resource. It's funny. I had like a similar experience with just my mom on some like early blog posts and like investment memos that we'd write, and I'd send it her way and just like, what's going on with work? And I try to like keep her updated on this is what we're doing. And the amount of times that I've heard, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's like a foreign language, and it helps me kind of craft, especially some of our investment memos around, using clear language, explaining what we're talking about, explaining the intricacies and the details and the vision behind it, not just using some of the acronyms that we talked about today. But it's great to know that you kept that in mind, because I think those resources are so valuable for our community, not only now, but moving forward, and not only for getting new people into crypto, but for keeping that ethos alive, back from, 15, 16, 17, and documenting some of the things that did happen, allows people to have kind of a sense that they were in this, environment back then, and have an understanding of how we got from point A to point B and point B to point C. And I think that's something that we always hear about, especially on our end with our customers, of what's coming up and what's coming next and what do I need to be on the lookout for. And we always want to highlight that. But I think, a lot of crypto is, for lack of better words, like money Legos. And it's like all these things that happened before enable this next thing to happen. And the composability of, you had centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and then, aggregators and things like that. And all that like tooling and tech allowed DeFi to flourish. And DeFi became like a big thing in 2020, but some of the first companies started off in 2016, 2017, and took a few years to kind of get the kinks out of the way and really solidify themselves. And same thing with, we talked about CryptoPunks or Crypto Kitties or Dapper Labs, like those companies and then projects started 4 or 5 years ago. And now they're like just starting to see the limelight. And now we're taking some of the NFT functionality and mixing it in with the financialization of NFTs and allowing you to earn interest or yield on NFT or fractionalize an NFT or use NFT as a stake or things like that. So it's all these like money Legos stacked on top is really interesting. But I think having an understanding of some of the first Lego pieces helps you understand, where we are now. So super excited to read through it. I know we're coming, towards the end of our time here today. I guess getting out of your background and looking, I guess, ahead, with all the access that you have and all the amazing people that you've talked to and all the research that you've done. We touched on it a little bit with NFTs, but are there anything in crypto that really excites you for, either what's happening now or what's going to happen moving forward?
DAOs, for
DAOs.
sure.
Yeah. And what specifically around DAOs? And we have some users that are familiar, and I don't know if you touched on this in your book, but the DAO and, back in 2015, and then, the revision of DAOs, kind of just what we talked about of some of these things, kind of, the cycles of these waves. But what about
I definitely
DAOs?
don't mean the DAO.
Yeah. For people that may not be aware, one, buy Laura's book and learn
Oh
about
yeah,
what's
you
going on.
guys, if you want to understand what happened with the DAO, definitely read my book. There is stuff in there that I'm sure a lot of people who were heavily involved with that do not even know that I was able to uncover. It's awesome. So those I think are all the longest chapters in the book too. So I really was able to get a lot. It was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super excited to read. Yeah. So with
but I didn't mean what I was excited about. I mean, it ended up being great for my book because there's like so much craziness. But what I meant was going forward, I'm excited about actual real DAOs.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I think what's so fascinating is that, all our lives, we've all seen organizations as being these kind of top-down things, like corporations. It's like you have the C-suite and then you have the different levels of management and, whatever. And this whole kind of culture that we have in the US around like startups and this whole internet revolution is really around these centralized business models. And I think also what we're starting to see is that, the internet allowed communities to congregate online, but it didn't really give them a way to do much with, okay, well, aside from things like Wall Street bets and clearly communities can organize online, even without tokens, but still they're doing that on a platform they don't own.
Yeah.
And what I like about DAOs is that you can create this community and you can all be part owners of it. And I haven't been watching super closely, but I've been watching a little bit like what's been going on with Gitcoin or whatever. And I think that's so fascinating. I love, as far as I understand, I think they use quadratic voting. Do you know if they do?
The quadratic fundraising for public goods deployment?
Yeah, where it can't be just like whales that are dominating. Because I know some of the DAOs right now, it is just like majority vote. And, I think the whales tend to have a little bit of more influence than they would if it was a more quadratic voting situation. But I'll have to look at, so, hopefully I haven't been misspeaking, but for some reason I thought that that's something that they utilized. But the point is just that I think we've all seen the excesses of that centralized business model. And I think it'll be super interesting just to see what happens when there's kind of like a different way to organize. And it really is a way where these online communities, which we've kind of been building in this Web 2.0 era, have a way to kind of like wield more influence. I'm very curious to see how that turns out.
Absolutely. Are there any DAOs that you're a part of at the moment? Have you dove in and tried to join like friends with benefits or bank
No,
benefits or something like
I
that?
try not to get involved because I try not to influence the action. Like I'm trying to just cover it
Yeah.
and, not be a part of it. But I might be changing a little bit of that in terms of like, like I have some ideas to do experiments with different things, in which case then, I would do them for journalistic reasons, to write about them or whatever. But at the moment, no, I haven't.
Interesting. Yeah, no, obviously with the rise of like Bankless DAO and their platform and podcast and newsletter and things like that, was just wondering if that was something that you've thought about or looked into. But I'm super excited for DAOs and the tooling that's being built around DAOs and the ability to have that ownership economy really come to life, and the creators of this value actually be able to capture some of that value in a community, and that's just really cool to be a part of. Well, sweet. I know we're wrapping up on our time. Really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you? Where can they find you online, and where can people buy the book?
So you can find me in multiple places. My Twitter handle is just Laura Shin, which is Shin. And the website for the podcast is unchainedpodcast.com. And if you want to buy the book, so the link to the place where you can pre-order the book is on my Twitter account, but it's also easy to remember. It's bit.ly/Cryptopians. So it's bit.ly/CRYPTOPIANS.
Amazing. Well, really excited to have you on. I appreciate you spending an hour with us and diving through your background, your history, all the amazing work you've done in crypto. As I mentioned, I am definitely going to be a buyer of the book. May ping you and see if I can get a signed copy or something like that. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And really appreciate you coming on. We will have our 5th episode of the Crypto Innovator Series in the middle of October. Have our 6th episode in October, 7, 8 in November, 9 and 10 in December. So really amazed with the level of talent we've been able to bring on to this channel, and really appreciate you coming on and spending an hour with us.
Yeah, it's been super fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on, Laura.
See you.